The first Descendant's open beta has finally and sadly come to a close, and I had over 70 hours to jump in the game, play it out, and see exactly what the first Descendant has to offer, and in this video I'm going to be pretty much talking about that. Now if you've looked at the title, then you have a good idea of what to expect from this video. Personally, I really enjoyed my playthrough of the first Descendant, and I really want to make that clear because while I will be criticizing some things, a lot of these are criticisms from a lot of people in the community, as whenever I stream this game, we all sat there for about an hour and just put together a list of things that we liked and disliked about the first Descendant, and mainly wanted to give some feedback mainly to the dev team and just see what everyone has to say, because again, it could help make the game a better game at the launch of the first Descendant. With that in mind, I can't help but reiterate, I absolutely adore the game, but it does have its issues. So with that in mind, let's begin talking about the first issue. Now, starting this thing off, I want to talk about the thing I think most people talked about, and probably in the discords and in the chat as well, that we've seen a lot of, and that was performance and optimization issues. I'm a PC player, but I've seen a mountain of feedback about the Xbox not being able to play, not being able to stream, having god-awful optimization. And while I am not a console player, I do want to make sure that the information is out that Xbox needs a lot of love. Now, while I'm not an Xbox player, I am a PC player, and for the first 2 days of playing the beta, I was just straight up not able to play the game on anything but the lowest possible settings, and I stuttered through the entire thing. Now, just to put it in perspective, I have a 3060 as well as a pretty damn good processor, 16 gigs of RAM. Now, that's a little bit closer to the minimum specs on RAMs, but 16 is still fine. So having to play on the absolute lowest, and I mean lowest of lowest settings, and not being able to do anything but stutter and get 30 FPS is not acceptable. Now, after re-downloading the game, I was able to jump in on the third day, and while the stuttering stopped, I actually was having memory issues where the game said I didn't have enough memory and it would constantly crash. So for 2 days, I verified, kept trying to get the game to work, couldn't stream for more than like 30 minutes, and had more and more issues. Eventually, on the last 3 days of playing the first Descendant, after the 4th re-download of the game, I was able to play the game at its pretty much full capacity. With that in mind, though there were no more stuttering or crashes, I was not very optimized whenever I played. In a lot of cases, if there was a lot of mob density, I couldn't get over 30 FPS, and normally throughout the world I did only maintain maybe 50 to 60, but it was not very stable. Ultimately, the optimization on the game across the board needs a massive improvement. In my eyes, that is the biggest negative of the game so far, and looking at all the feedback that I've gotten from players who played the game on the Discord and who came into the stream, it seems to be a universal negative. With that in mind, that's not the biggest negative. Honestly, I think that's fairly common for games in 2023, so if they can get on top of this, I think majority of the issues with the first Descendant will be solved just in this alone. Now, the next thing that the dev team really needs to take a look at, and this is more of a personal thing for me, and that is the individual Descendants themselves. Now, I'm going to be honest, Ajax, Lepek, Bunny, and a few others were really good. I think they're some of the best Descendants I've seen, and they all feel unique and different in their own way, and in a lot of cases, I think they're some of the best Descendants available. With that said, there are a few Descendants that I think need some love. Some that comes to mind is Freya, Blair, and Glay. Now, I know the last one may be a little bit surprising, but for Glay, I think it's mainly that she needs the bugs fixed, because through the entire open beta, there was a lot of hacking, cheating, and stuff that comes with Glay. And I know I don't really like to talk about cheating because I know that some people are actually okay with cheating, but for me, I really would like a game to be a little bit more fair, even though we're not competitive against each other. I don't really like going into missions and having the Glade just spray down the boss in 10 seconds. It kind of ruins the experience for me personally. Now, more so on a core fundamental game design, I think that, for example, Blair just felt pretty bland overall. I didn't really like his kit. His kit seemed a little bit confusing to me, and this is kind of the same issue I had with Blair back in the 2022 beta. Like, I really love his aesthetic. I love that he's a fire-based character, but to me, when I look at his kit and try to play it, it just doesn't play very well. A lot of that has to do with how his fire skills work, and really, if we're looking at his C ability where he calls back his fire, it feels kind of boring. And that kind of extends to Freya too, where she has her first Venom ability, she throws on the ground. Her second ability is just she press a button and she get buffed. Her third ability, she kind of just throws a Venom at a person using a similar animation. And then the final ability is just activating a gun. Ultimately, it feels very boring, and I find a few characters to be kind of like this as well. Now, I love Jaber. I think he's a great character and he brings a lot to the table, but again, it's kind of the same thing. He drops his turrets on the ground, he shoots it with his medical gun, and then he kind of just press buttons that really doesn't feel that impactful. Overall, I do think that a good half of the Descendants feel very good, but on the other end, the other half of the Descendants don't feel very good at all and feels a little bit stale and boring. Now, to add to this, and maybe something that really makes them feel boring even more so, is whenever we go into the Void Intercepts and face off against the Colossus, a lot of the skill-based Descendants don't really scale that well into fighting. For example, Glade does very well because she actually scales really well with weapon damage, but when you go in with someone who is a little bit more like skill-based, power is a little hard to maintain. The boss moves around a lot, so for example with Blair, you're like really not going to get a lot out of your first, second, and in a lot of cases your third ability. And honestly, I just would like to see a lot of the characters just feel a little bit better scaled whenever they go into Void Intercept, so they can just feel like they're usable other than just their weapon. Because in my eyes, it creates a meta where people only wants to play Glade or a weapon-based Descendant, and it doesn't feel very good, and it feels like you're a little bit lackluster. Now, shifting gears here because I don't want it to feel like a totally negative video. If I'm being honest, I still think the game is great. It has a lot of positives about it. I think for the most part, I can see myself playing the game for many years to come. So I do want to toss in a little bit of positive just to keep the morals high. Now, I did want to compliment them on the modding system. I think the modding system is very well made. I know some people are going to say, well, it is a copy paste of the Warframe modding system, and to be quite honest with you, I don't see that as a bad thing. If the system is not broken, why try to introduce something new or fix it? To me, I think they nailed the modding system, and I really love how it's implemented in the game. I would like to see a little bit more detail on the mods whenever we're slotting them into our gear and whatnot. But for the most part, I think the modding system feels very good and it feels fair, especially when it comes to upgrading weapons, because you can upgrade weapons that are like lower level and scale those up to your current level with a proper gun that you trade off for it. I think that is a phenomenal system that almost no other game I've ever seen have. So there's a lot here in the modding system that feels really good. And while we're talking about the modding system, I do want to talk about the crafting system, because again, the crafting system feels really good. In other games like Warframe, it's a little bit difficult to find where to look for specific items in the game, and I think they did a really good job of laying that out whenever you go to the modding lady in the Albion. On top of that, and I don't know if this is going to be the case for whenever the game comes out, but when it comes to actually building the Descendants, it took about 12 hours for each Descendant to make, and that's pretty damn good considering in other games of the genre like Warframe, which I love to compare it to, it takes 3 days to get your frame out, and that is a significant difference. Even if they were to triple the time, which would be 36 hours, a day and a half, is still significantly better than most other games, and I never felt like I was waiting to play the game. In a lot of cases, I felt like I didn't have enough time before my next Descendant was ready. So in my opinion, they've done a really good job on the modding system as well as the crafting system in the first Descendant. Now, some of the complaints when it came to exploring the open world were mainly, I got a lot of, it felt a little bit barren and there wasn't a lot going on. People would like wandering patrols and just something that made the world feel more lifeless, and this was something I agreed with as well. When you go to a mission, only then do the mobs spawn. I would like to see something just static in the world, just existing, so it doesn't feel so lifeless. While we're talking about the missions, that was another complaint. It felt a lot of the missions were samey. You do the defense, you do the little charge to blow everything up, you do the radar defense mission. A lot of samey missions that a lot of players would like to see some changes on, maybe to add a little bit to it. I will say I do like the fact that the scenery changed fairly rapidly. Going through the campaign, while the missions were a little bit boring and repetitive, in my opinion, the world changing really did complement it. So I will say to that, I love the change in the world. Now, some of the things that some of us talked about in the stream that could really help this, one thing we noticed in the game is whenever you leave a zone, there's really no reason to go back to that zone. And a great way to incentivize people to go back would be mini bosses. You could do some events within the world that could help lower, level players who are going through the campaign. Do these X missions, and these missions will trigger a mini boss that could drop specific mods. And this, in theory, can actually solve two problems with one, making sure that the areas stay relevant, things that you do feel relevant, and even more so, it could help you like target farm a specific mod or something. There was a lot of things like that we talked about, and I think these are some really great options to make the world feel a lot better. Now, ultimately, when it came to the open world, that was the biggest section when it came to like suggestions, ideas, as well as our complaints when it came to the open world. And I think a lot of players are kind of feel about the same when it comes to this, because the defense missions were boring. It did feel a little bit lifeless and barren, and ultimately there's no reason to go back to those other zones unless you're playing as another Descendant, leveling them up. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about, and this is arguably going to be the most important thing, not just for me, but for every single player who's playing the game, and that is the monetization of the game. And this is really big, especially for me as a content creator, because generally I'm not a fan of pay to win games. I don't really like making content about them. I do make some content about some pay to win games, but it's not really my ideal type of situation. And even more so, beyond me being a content creator, me being a player, I value fairness. And that's really something that's a little bit weary when it comes to Nexon. No hate on them, but sometimes some of their policies are not the best. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns and negatives that come from the first Descendant, is that it's from Nexon and they're going to make the game pay to win. Now, unlike most creators, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it and say it's not paid to win. I don't know what the monetization is. No one knows what the monetization is because they haven't released any information. And if anyone's told you anything about the monetization model, they're either just pulling it out their ass or just straight up lying, because we do not have any official information. What we do have in the game is we see that we can farm every single Descendant. That is something that we see currently in the beta now. We see that it doesn't take a lot of time to get them done. The farming of the materials seems within reason from my experience. I'm a grinder, so maybe for me it's not that hard, but to you it may be a little bit tougher, so that's going to be based on interpretation of how much you can play. And what Nexon has said is you're going to be able to play the game to its fullest without having to pay. Buying Descendants isn't a big deal to me since you can farm them. Buying mods isn't that big of a deal to me either if you can farm them in the game. But if it's something that has to be farmed outside of the game that isn't cosmetic, I think that could be a problem, and hopefully Nexon doesn't do that. Again, I have no confirmation if this will be the case, but from what I can tell, and I'm not saying guaranteeing anything, but from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like they're going that route. They're probably going to go with a Warframe style model. Now, ultimately, that's my impressions of the game. There are some things that could be improved on, some things I could elaborate on more, but I don't want to make this video too long because those are the major concerns for me and probably a good portion of the player base. With that in mind, and I'm going to keep reiterating this because I want to be very clear, I absolutely adore the first Descendant. I think the game has a lot to offer. I think it's actually a direct competitor to Warframe, way more than Destiny 2 ever has been or ever will be. And I think they have something really special with the game, but I do think they need to fix some of these issues that a lot of players are having and keep the game fair so that it doesn't feel so pay to win. And I think we have ourselves a game that could last for many, many years. With that said, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the game, your experience, whether you had latency issues, had optimization issues, if you didn't like the Descendants, whatever the case was, if you enjoyed it, whatever the case. Leave it down in the comments, let me know, let the development team know your thoughts and what you want to see in the game, and maybe, who knows, they'll actually read it and check it out. With that said, I want to thank you guys for joining me here today. Don't forget to like as well as subscribe for more First Descendant content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.